name is Rich Germeau. I've lived in this area for most of my life, except for 3 years when I lived in Alaska when I was a kid. I grew up playing in the woods and fishing and hunting and getting driven around by my grandpa and visiting old people that were farmers and loggers, and mostly the Olympic Peninsula area, Washington State. In 1997, I joined the Marine Corps Reserves, and I did that for some 5.5 years. And then, while I was doing that in 98, I became a police officer for Department of Defense in Puget Sound Naval Shipyard. That's where I kind of started my law enforcement career. I was 21 years old. And I worked there for a couple of years, and then I moved out to the West End out in Forks, and I became a cop in La Push. And that's where I had my first Bigfoot encounter. I'd been working in La Push for a while. I'm not sure how long by that point. Let me see. The sighting was in 2000. I started in La Push in 99. I think it was the spring of 99. And the sighting was in July of 2000. So I was actually coming into work on swing shift that day, and I was driving down La Push Road. And if you're coming into La Push, you first come in past, before you get to the reservation, you come to the first beach, third beach trailhead. And then you drive down into the reservation, you come to the first housing area, and then you pass another, which is on your left, and the second housing area will be on your right. And there's a bunch of other facilities in that area now. It changes a lot. They've done a lot of enhancement to that area from the time that I had my sighting. In fact, at that time, the police station was down by the beach, and now it's up by the housing area. So you come around the corner past that, the housing areas, and on the left will be the second beach trailhead, which is the National Park trailhead to go down to Second Beach. It was like a mile hike down to the beach. And you turn the corner there, and you keep coming down the hill towards La Push, and on the left you'll start to see what they call the pinnacles. There's rocks that poke out, and there's kind of cliffs off to your left where you're coming down to First Beach, which is La Push Beach. And Lonesome Creek comes out, and at that time there was a bunch of brush off to the left where it was really dense and you couldn't see into it, all the way down to where the creek is. And there was actually a lot of people camping down there at that time, because La Push is a big camping area down by Lonesome Creek Store, and there's a couple of like hotels down there, lodges, and then they have campsites and all kinds of stuff, and there's a lot of surfers that go down there. And this particular time it was real nice weather, and there was a lot of people. It was early July, and there was a lot of people out there at the beach. So it wasn't like there wasn't a lot of people around. There were people everywhere that day. And in fact, close proximity to where this thing came out of the bushes at, within a couple hundred yards, there was just tons of people on the beach around the corner, right? Surfing, doing all their thing. It was still during daytime hours. So I'm driving down the road and then getting close to Lonesome Creek Store. Okay, and then on the right side is the Lonesome Creek Fish Hatchery, and there's a chain link fence on the right side. And I'm coming down the hill towards this, and I'm probably like 70 yards when I first see this thing. And then it's just big figure just steps out of the brush on the beach side of the road, and then it just walks across the road somewhat swiftly, and it doesn't even look at me, and it kind of just glides across the road. It's like it was non-human in the gait, and it was very fluid. I mean, and I guess in the nature that it walked, no head bob, it just kind of glided. And it took about 4 steps, and it hit the fence, and it disappeared into the salmon berries. And by the time that I stopped my car, it's probably within 50, 60 yards of it. Because when I first saw it, I was still rolling, and then I came to a stop as it was in the process of crossing. And I'm not sure how long it took it to take 4 steps or whatever. It seemed to be moving. It was a matter of seconds that the whole encounter happened. But I noticed that when I first saw it, I was a trained observer. I'm a police officer. And I saw this thing that it was humanoid, but it didn't look human. And I'm trying to put it in the correct classification box. And it's bouncing back out in my brain. It's like, no, it doesn't fit. What is it? Well, I know what it is, but those aren't real, so it can't be that. I mean, I'm looking at this giant figure that was like, that thick from chest to back. I mean, and huge, 8 feet tall, non-human gait, but humanoid. And I'm trying to classify what this thing is, but it's not real. And I know what it is, but what it is not real. So I go through this period of shock where I'm admitting to myself what I just saw, and I'm all excited at that point. I mean, fear is going through my mind, but I'm in a car, so I'm relatively safe. It all happened pretty quick, and I'm just trying to hold myself together. And then, as I start to take off and go again, and there's no other cars around, it just happens to be where I'm the only car that views this thing from both directions. And there's a lot of people down here, like I'm saying. And people walk along the road there regularly, but nobody happened to be there on that day at that time. And then as soon as I start to go away, I start to feel like betrayal, I guess I would say, because I start to think about the fact that I'm a trained professional, a trained observer. I just happen to see something that's not supposed to be real, and my whole world is in disarray at this moment, because I'm driving away from this thing, having to deal with a realization of something that isn't supposed to be real, that I just happened to have an encounter with real as day. And I had gone through the entire educational system in public school and the military and in law enforcement, and nobody saw ever fit to inform me about this or that I might encounter this thing or see it. It just happens to be that it's just thrown on my shoulders to deal with it. And then at that point, what do you do? I didn't think all of that at that moment, but I started to think about it then. I did feel I was angry a little bit as soon as I'm driving away, because I'm starting to think, how come I just had to see this thing and I'm never told about it before, only as a fairy tale. I never believed in them or anything like that. Always thought it'd be great if it was true. So I end up driving down the last half a mile to the police station, and when I pull up, there's my sergeant is Kevin Martin, this guy, another officer named Rick, and then there is a deputy sheriff named Matt. I can't remember his last name. Matt. This is a long time ago. Anyways, so I tell them, I walk in, and they asked me what happened to you, because it was noticeable on my face that I seen something or something happened. And I said, you guys never believe it. I just seen a Bigfoot at Lonesome Creek. And they laughed at me real quick. And I'm like, I'm serious. And they joked with me for a while. And then, Matt told me, well, you should probably write a memo to the sheriff's office. So I did. I wrote him a memo, and I don't ever know what happened to it. I don't know if he turned it into the sheriff's office or not, like he said he was going to. But anyways, that's pretty much the story. They razzed me for a little while, and then Rick Lester actually confided in me and told me that even Matt, they were on a four-wheeling trip up in the Clawwa, which is outside of Forks, where it was a bunch of cops that were driving Suzuki Samurais up there, and they happened to pull over and rest for a while, and they found some Bigfoot tracks off the side of the road, and they all agreed with each other that they weren't going to tell anybody about it, because in those days, that was in the late 90s and early 2000, and it just wasn't something that you generally were going to tell people about, because people are going to laugh at you or call you crazy, especially if you're a cop in those days. I didn't seem to care as much. I'm just that kind of person, but, that's pretty much what happened there. And then, I went about a good 8 years, and I didn't get involved in Bigfoot research at all. I can tell you that after that incident, there was one other incident where I might have had an encounter. I was steelhead fishing in March the following year up the Dicky River off of, I had parked up the end of this road called the Mina Smith Road, where there's an old bridge that used to cross the Dicky River where the West and the East Fork come together. And the bridge was washed out. Well, I parked there, and it was March 1st, which is kind of the peak of the winter steelhead season. And I went to go hike upstream. And the whole time I was going, I stayed in the bottom of this little canyon where this river was, and there's a lot of slate and stuff in there, sandstone. It's kind of hard to walk, and it's really brushy in this area around the sides. Well, I kept feeling the whole time that I was being watched, and I didn't really know why. In those days, I kind of thought, well, maybe, there's a lot of cougars and stuff like that around, but I felt like I was being watched quite a bit when I was out in those areas back in those days, fishing and stuff. I was in remote areas alone, and I always attributed it to animals that I couldn't see, or because I found a lot of cougar tracks and stuff like that. But anyways, I fished my way up, and I just had this overwhelming feeling that I kept being watched and I wasn't safe. Not fearful or anything totally, but just something's there. And finally, I was pretty determined to catch a fish, so I kept going. I went up about 1.5 miles, and I finally caught a fish. And the fishing wasn't as good as it should have been, and I finally caught one, and I decided at that point, I got a fish, I'm getting out of here, and I didn't feel safe walking out down the river. So I wanted to get up out of the river, and I knew on the other side of the river there was an old logging road over there that could walk me back to where the old bridge towards my car was washed out, and I could get back in and the river and cross back to my car. Well, I started to walk out up out of this slough brush and these small fir trees, which were like this size fir, fairly tight together, like 20-year-old. And the slough brush was really high, like 4 or 5 feet high, like up to my chest. And I started walking up out of here. I was like 50 yards out of the creek, and then all of a sudden, I could see the brush moving, and something crashed right by me. I mean, literally, close enough that I could feel the wind of it go by me, yet there was nothing there, just the brush was moving. And I stood there looking like, what the hell just happened? Because something moved the brush and ran right by me, and I could feel the wind of it, but there was nothing there. The brush was moving and nothing there. And so I don't know what that was, except I sensed something watching me the whole time, and then I try to get about and something charges right by me, yet I can't see it. It's invisible. I mean, literally, I was looking under the brush. Was it like a bear or something under the brush next to me that I can't see? And there's nothing there. It just stops. And I'm like, what the hell? So I just ran right down to the creek again, and I just booked out of there all the way back to my car. And I don't know what it was, but I think that it could have been one of them. I mean, it could have been one of them in like its stealth, form where it's cloaked, I guess you could say, like Predator. So that happened, and then 10 years went by. I can tell you that after I had my encounter, that was one of the only fishing trips I did by myself during that for a long period of time, because it really changed my behavior when I first saw the one in La Push, because I had this realization that there was something of high intelligence that was humanoid out there that legitimately, if it wanted to do something to you or make you disappear, there'd be nothing you could do to stop it. I mean, how are you going to stop an 800-pound, 8-foot-tall humanoid being that is built to live in the forest and to not be detected? I mean, no gun, no nothing is going to protect you. If it wants to, it'll just sneak up on you and make you disappear. It'll just grab you and lights out. It'll be over. I mean, really, that's the truth. So I had that realization. I mean, where else do I have to go off of in those days? I mean, there's no information out there. There's no legitimate textbooks that you can pick up that give you the history of Sasquatch and how to stay safe or what dangers might exist. There's nothing out there like that, right? Especially in the 2000s, there's nothing like that. So you have nothing to go off of except let your mind run wild about the possibilities about what could happen after you've seen this giant humanoid-looking thing with hair all over it out in the woods. So it changed my behavior for quite some time. It took me quite a while before I felt comfortable enough again on my own, outside of a few incidents, where even up to Dicky, where I had some kind of freaky encounter with something, and I was jumpy too, and it took me a while, but I never got involved in any research. Later on, I moved to Eastern Washington for a year, and in 2004, I came and worked for the Mason County Sheriff's Office. And in 2008, through a mutual friend of my wife's, she knew this guy, Derek, who was a big Bigfoot researcher from the 80s and 90s and currently. And she knew him just from town, and she had told him my story and gave him my phone number. So he called me one day, and so I told him my story. This was in 2008. And he begged me basically to get involved with research with him, and I was reluctant. I mean, I was a whistleblower at that time. I was a detective, a lot of stuff going on. And ultimately, I kind of reluctantly did end up getting involved as a release from my job because of all the stress and stuff I was going through. Ended up jumping in with both feet with him ultimately, and we ended up forming the Olympic project together. And we set up a camera trap project in the Olympic Mountains that we had a funder, a benefactor, I guess, and paid for all of our stuff. And he actually bought a piece of property for the Olympic project up in Forks. Anyways, the idea that I had was I utilized the BFRO Flats database, which is a sightings database. Like the BFRO page that you normally see only has 10% of the reports that are in Flats. The Flats database is a private database that has all the reports in it. And then all the people who have permission to go in there can field those reports and investigate them. But only about 10% of them ever get published publicly for all different kinds of reasons, right? A lot of times it's follow through on the part of the people, or it's follow through on the investigator. A lot of good cases aren't public because of that. And then sometimes it's because of other reasons they're not public, maybe because the people that report it didn't want it to make it public. but it's a vast resource that the public does not have access to. And you can basically, it's probably the biggest database for Bigfoot related stuff anywhere in the world is flats. And what I did was take flats, and I was able to find locations that had historical sightings repeated sightings over a long period of time, like 50 years. And it may be 10 or 20 years between sightings, but it was happening in the same place, right? And then what I would do is take these locations, and I would start studying the topography close to these areas. And I would see if there were sightings in this area, sightings over here, and start mapping these sightings out that are historical, repeated sightings, and then you look at the terrain in between. I would start studying the topography in these areas that were close in relation to these sighting clusters. And basically, in the Olympic Peninsula, you have dramatic changes in geography, topography, where you have low elevation goes to high elevation. You have rugged mountains, forests, rivers, canyons, and everything. So basically, terrain dictates movement. So if you can figure out where the sightings were historically and where these Bigfoots were at, then you can figure out, if some were seen in this location 5 miles away, some were seen here, or 2 miles, and what is the terrain like in between. So they had to navigate this terrain to get from here to here. So then what you can do is you can take an animal that allegedly is supposed to be really rare, because when I started getting involved with the Olympic Project research, I wasn't a skeptic, I knew these things existed, and I knew that I had a good chance to be able to be successful because I had a lot of background and training. I knew they were real. I wasn't skeptical about it. I was already a cop, a detective, and highly trained in that, and I could utilize all those skills to try to help me with Bigfoot research. So, I also knew that once you start narrowing down possible routes of travel, then you take something that is hard to find and you start moving into a spot where at some point it's going to come through this area if you can find evidence they're using it. So we started researching these travel routes and funnels, and we started finding evidence of them using some of these places, right? So we started putting cameras up right away, and we had success pretty fast. We started finding tracks and different things in some of these spots. I got pictures of of one up in the Hamma Hamma on a game camera, and was able to recover DNA off of that. My main research area ultimately probably was the Hamma Hamma area around Lake Cushman. That's where I probably spent most of my time, and where I picked, that was where I was going to focus most of my energy. And I probably, in general, and with Bigfoot altogether, I think through the main part of my research, I was probably putting in about 30 hours a week in the field. I was taking vacation, sick leave, my days off. I worked 410s a lot of the time on there, so I had quite a bit of time extra. Lake Cushman area, Hamma Hamma, Dow Mountain was one of the areas that I was in, related to Cushman and the Hamma Hamma area. Dow Mountain is right on the edge of Price's Lake. It's a mountain where they had an old logging camp, and it actually has a lot of ghost history and other paranormal history related to it because there was a lot of deaths related. They suspect it's because of there was a lot of deaths related to the logging camp that was there. Not Bigfoot related, but the Bigfoot happened to be in this area too. And what happened was with Dow Mountain is, this is probably the one incident, it's probably the ongoing research location that started to change me related to what my views were related to the research. And I'll tell you, coming into it in the beginning, I was coming from a mindset of a law enforcement officer, a detective, a cop. I'm like true crime, and the fact that I knew that Bigfoots were real because I had seen one. I was a full believer in the fact that these things were either an ape or some sort of a relic hominid, and they were just really rare. And that's why they had existed mostly undetected up to this point. And it wasn't until I started really, looking in flats and then started to go out and research sites myself. And I could go into these places that I would research in flats that had all this historical data on repeated sightings. And even if there hadn't been anything recent within 20 years, if I would start going into a place and looking around long enough, I'd start finding stuff. They'd still be there. I mean, my experience was if you could find historical data that they were in a place, they didn't leave. And it hadn't mattered really what had happened to the place. It didn't matter if there was development there. It didn't matter if there was logging. It didn't make any difference whatsoever. They were still generally there, or in there at certain times, and like I said, I thought this was either a relic hominid or an ape, and it was just really rare. And it wasn't until that I started to really do the camera research and I started to get embedded in areas that I knew that they were at, because I was seeing regular evidence of them, and even habituation sites like Hartstein Island or Dow Mountain in particular, where I spent a lot of time and I was there all the time. And I tried to establish, like at Dow Mountain, I tried to establish gifting there. And I did. They would take stuff from me, but not give me anything in return, but sometimes they would bring back the stuff that they took. And what happened in Dow Mountain that was so weird is that the guy that I met there, the people that were there at this habituation site, they had filed a BFRO report, which originally was fielded by this guy, David Ellis. And it was in my research area, so I really wanted to incorporate it into what I was doing. So I talked to him about it, and he turned it over to me. And this guy, Michael Pennington, and his wife were the ones that owned this property. And they had lived at this house for a period of a year or so. And then they had a big storm there, which they were stuck there for like 2 weeks in the snow. So they ended up moving back to their house in Bothell or someplace like that, and they maintained this property up there. But what happened when they moved there, they quickly found out that they had other neighbors that were there. And Michael, this guy's a musician. His wife was a witch, actually, and they were kind of strange people. He's an artist too and a musician, like I said. And what I had found with a lot of these habituation sites, that all the people that seemed to have this type of interaction that was ongoing, they were all kind of different. They were different than your mainstream people. They weren't the same as eccentric people sometimes, or they were just different. They were involved in other stuff, like his wife was in Wicca and he was a musician artist, and they both were pretty open-minded people. They had a dog. Anyways, long story short, he had a couple of sightings there at his house. They heard a lot of mimicry. They actually used to invite people over and play music, so the Bigfoots would come around the campfire and they could see their eye shine and hear them walking around. They could hear them talking and stuff around their house. Pretty fantastic stuff he was claiming to me. And at that time, I would take it all with a grain of salt. These people clearly believed what they were telling me, but I couldn't accept all of it. I had to take it all into consideration, because by then I was starting to hear that a lot of this weird stuff was coming up with different witnesses I had talked to. And I had dedicated as much time and resources into these places, but I had talked to witnesses that were corroborating what I was hearing from Michael and other people, but I still wasn't buying into it altogether. I was just thinking, well, it's got to be another explanation for this type of thing that seems to reoccur in this Bigfoot phenomena. But I wasn't quite ready to buy in. But it's building up in me, because I have all these resources. I'm putting all this effort into these places where I know that I'm right around these things. They're aware of me, right? Yet it's not happening. And I'm not really understanding why, because I can hide these cameras as best as I can. I can make it impossible, put them in traps in ways that they have to enter an area, and there's no way they could get by it without getting their picture taken. And I would leave certain ways open to where they could get in, but they always knew where the cameras were. They always could find them no matter how good you hit them. And it was almost like you couldn't beat them. In fact, at Dow Mountain, I went up there one day and I decided there's a waterfall at this spot. There's a lot of footage of Dow Mountain and different interviews and stuff. I've taken people there. And now, just recently, the property sold, and I don't know who owns it now. But he used to take me to this little spot where I established gifting, where there was like a solid rock area where a waterfall came through, this little creek. And it was really cool in there, even when it was hot. And there were some pools in solid rock that would fill up with water. And he said they liked this spot, and he would play music there, and he would gift them fruit and other food and stuff there. So that's why I started to establish my site of trade. And he didn't live there. He would just show up at this place once in a while if I was going to be there. And I ultimately was going in and out of this place alone. I had full permission to go in there, and I was stopping in there at night sometimes. And nothing happened when I was there other than one time. And I was setting cameras up on the other side. I climbed the other side of the creek, and I hung some ropes from these trees so I could rappel down to the side of this little cliff thing, and I could put these cameras on these trees, because I thought there's no way that anything can manipulate these cameras on the side of this cliff. Well, I came back the next day, and all my cameras had been turned on those trees, and all the camouflage I put on them ripped off, and those were on the cliff face. But I was having rocks thrown at me while I was setting those cameras. I could hear rocks whizzing by me, like small ones, like, and then hit the rock around me and bounce. Like something was throwing rocks at me while I was setting the cameras, but I couldn't see where it was coming from. I could just hear the rocks whizzing by and hitting. So they were aware I'm setting the cameras, and like right after I show up. And then I check the cameras, and there's nothing on them. They've all been moved, camouflage ripped off, and there's no pictures of nothing. So, but what happened at that site in particular that really was kind of the main thing. And everything kind of started to stop after this. And finally I decided that I was tired of playing these games. I mean, they had taken things from me and brought them back. A small Barbie doll that I put on a rock down there and outside of a camera view. Like, they would take things that were not in front of cameras, but they wouldn't take anything in front of a camera. They would throw rocks at stuff in front of a camera and knock it over out of the view of the camera, because I started to figure out that the stuff would be knocked over, but no pictures or nothing. But then I started seeing rocks in the frame that weren't there before. So they were throwing rocks at it to knock it over, but they wouldn't step in front of the camera to grab it. Right, so what ended up happening there is I decided I made a wood box, and I took a camera and I put it inside of the box, and I took a mannequin head, carved out the back of the head, and I stuck it over the camera, and I left the box closed. And I thought they would open the box, and then they would grab the head and pull it off, right? So they wouldn't touch it. They wouldn't do anything to the box. So I came back a week or so later, nothing. They wouldn't take the head off. The camera is not going to take no pictures until you pull the head off, because it won't activate it until it's blacked out with a head on it, right? No motion, no IR. You pull the head off, it's going to get a picture. Well, nothing would touch it, right? So I got frustrated, and I opened the box, propped it open with a stick so you could see the head in there, so maybe that would entice them. Because what I had found that with gifting, they liked humanoid stuff, dolls, toy horses, stuff like that. There were other things too that they would take. Mirror, they didn't like mirrors. I would put mirror up, and they would take it and put it down, face down. They took it out. I would stick it in the moss. It would stick out of the ground like this, up face, and they would always put it down, face. Take it out and put it face down. So they didn't like to see themselves. I don't know. They never leave it face up. I brought a rubber ball one time with a Hannah Montana on it, and they shoved a stick all the way through it, popped it. I don't know why. I used to stop at Walmart and buy cheap toys and leave them out there. But what happened with the head in the box? I know we're skipping around here a little bit, but okay. So I put this head in this box, and I had a head over the top of the camera, and I ended up propping the box open with a stick, so the face was visible from the inside, so maybe to entice them a little more. Well, nothing happened, right? So then I came back, and I pulled the head actually off and set it next to the camera inside. And I came back like 4 days later, and something happened the next time. I come back, and I look, and I walk into the trail down to the creek from the property, and I notice in the creek there's a string, like a white string, that's suspended above the creek, like in the middle of the creek, and it's wrapped around a twig here and there. And I follow that string. It's all the way up to my box. And at the base of the box on the tree, there's a rock that's kind of round, like about the size of a basketball, and it's sitting on top of the tip of the string. And so I'm looking at, and it's right at the base of the tree where my box is propped open. And you look down the creek, and it's going down the creek below the waterfall, and the string is suspended like 2 to 3 feet above the water, and periodically it's wrapped around a twig, and it goes down like 200 yards down the creek, way down. It's kite string. They stole kite string, right? And so the camera is open, right? The face of the box is open. The camera's sitting next to it. Something walked up the creek in line with the camera all the way up to the camera, put the rock down with the string. I checked the camera, and the only pictures on it are me walking up to the camera. There's no pictures of it, anything putting the string there with the rock on it. Nothing. How does that happen? It gets me walking up to it. And this thing is pointed right down it's got a full view all the way down the creek for 50, 60 feet at least. But no pictures of what put the string up or the rock right underneath the camera. Big rock, like a 60-pound rock, about like that big around. And so then I started to really think about it. How can something know, how can it put a string there? How can it put the rock there and not get its picture taken? The camera's in full view, but no picture. And I ended up talking to Michael about it, and he told me later that they mind spoke with him about that, and they were highly offended by what I had done. with that head thing. They didn't like it at all. And it's true enough. Everything kind of stopped after that. And I kept going back to that site, but nothing ever really happened again. I never found any tracks there, and I never saw Bigfoot or anything there. I just had the interaction with the stuff. But like I had said before I even started researching that site fully, after I talked to Michael, I did research through our CAD system at the sheriff's office when I worked there, and I was able to find a half a dozen or so police reports that were either for prowlers or suspicious complaints that were from that area around that house, other neighbors who had sightings of things that they reported as prowlers or other suspicious. But really, they were reporting Bigfoots because they were describing like really tall individuals standing at the edge of their yard or in their driveway that were moonlit, wearing all black. And when they would shine flashlights on them, their eyes would reflect amber. But I mean, I talked to some of the deputies that went up and fielded these complaints and talked to these people, and they didn't know what to make of it. They never found any evidence. All they did was relay into the CAD system what the people had told them. But these people had no idea. They weren't thinking about Bigfoot or anything like that. But these things were around in people's yards and stealing stuff from people, as evident in the kite string underneath the rock and the tree. And, and this area in particular, another thing that happened, and it may have been different Bigfoots, but in Price's Lake area, which is adjacent to Down Mountain, was another area I was researching heavily. It was an area that was alleged that these things wintered over in, and I had fielded quite a few reports from some county employees and hunters and stuff that had sightings or found tracks around Price's Lake. And I had researched that area heavily, and there was a swamp in there amongst this lake, and there was a crossing area which all animals used in the one end of it. And that's close to where one of the guys I had talked to had a sighting while he was elk hunting. Well, I had assets in this area for a few years, and I had gate keys. It was a closed-off area to the public. I had keys to get in here from Department of Natural Resources. And in return, I was doing security for them with game cameras, trying to catch garbage dumpers and stuff. Plus, I was a cop, so, they gave me keys to get in. So I had full reign of this area that nobody else could get into for about 9 months out of the year, but I could drive in. And I had set cameras on this crossing on the other side of it, of the river or the swamp, and then a few hundred yards over on this side, and I'd leave stuff for 6 months or a year sometimes and not come back. But I put lithium batteries in them, so you get like 13 months worth of runtime, 10,000 photos at least, with new batteries. So I hadn't been back for a while, and I came back in the wintertime after I'd set the cameras in the summer, I believe. And first camera I checked was on the side closest to where my car was, and the batteries were dead, and I wasn't able to check the card till later. Then I hiked around, which is a couple hours for me to get to the other side, because I got to go around this swamp to get to it where this crossing is. And I get to the spot where I have this camera on the crossing, and I had the camera attached to a vine maple tree that was a really big vine maple, about that big around. And vine maples are really strong. You can't they're really springy. Right, they're really hard to just bend and break. Well, I come back to this tree where this camera is, and the camera is turned around the back side of the tree, and the tree snapped off that far above the camera. Totally splintered. I'm like, holy smokes, And so I get those cameras home, and this is the spooky part. So I go and I check the second camera, which is the one that had the tree snapped off, and I find that I can watch the frames of the camera being moved about 25 minutes after I set it. So whatever moved it seen me put the camera in place. And then after the tree gets snapped over, a raven seems to show up about every couple of months and just look in the camera like this. And then regularly after that. Maybe the same raven, maybe a different one, I don't know. But whatever, on both those, so one camera goes dead immediately within an hour after I set it. It's like brand new lithium batteries that last 13 months minimum. It goes dead within an hour of me putting that camera out there. I just put new batteries in the camera before I even got out of the car. Brand new lithium Energizer batteries, like $30 worth of 12 of them are like $30 at least, or more, I don't know. So that one goes dead, and then the next one, within 20 minutes, I set the tree that the camera's on gets snapped off over, and the camera spun around on so it's not facing the crossing anymore, like immediately. So whatever did it knew I was watching me set these things. So That's Dow Mountain. No, that was Price's Lake, right next to Dow Mountain. So by this time, I'm going through this whole thing, and I'm starting to account for a lot more of this strange evidence, because I'm talking to witnesses, and some of these people are telling me this stuff that's consistent among them, paranormal type stuff like mind speak or other weird stuff, cloaking. The Dow Mountain guy told me that he watched one cloaked one day, and he described it to me just like the movie Predator. It's like he could see it, but he couldn't see it at the same time. He could see the form of it, but it was standing there, right close to him. And I had heard that many more times too throughout my research, and I had read reports online that claimed the same thing, and the people describe it just like the movie Predator. It looks exactly the same as the movie Predator, and they think Bigfoots have the ability to do this one way or another, either through vibration, like low frequency vibration. They don't know, but allegedly people have witnessed them cloak, and I've heard it from witnesses personally before. I haven't seen it myself, but I've heard it. Maybe witnessed it, like I said, in the Dicky and that other account I told you about. That's all I can attribute that to. But this whole body of knowledge that I'm building up to this point, there happens to be a lot of glaring things that I can't deny. And being a law enforcement officer and a detective, I have to consider all the evidence. I just can't cherry pick the evidence that I like, that suits me, or that I'm comfortable with. I have to consider all parts. And even though that I'm a black and white, type thinker at this point, and I'm not really considering anything paranormal, I myself am starting to have things that I can't explain, that don't really make any sense to me, and that I would probably start to put in the range of paranormal, and I'm having to consider my own experiences at this point and that of other people's experiences that I have talked to, and their experiences that I talked to them about before are starting to corroborate things that I have experienced myself. So I'm starting to make this transition through this process to where I still am married to the idea that if I put in enough organic effort, that I'm going to get the results that I want, and that no one's going to deny me this. I'm determined. I'm going to do it. I'm having success. I'm in the areas around these things. It's going to happen eventually. So, I'm starting to consider everything at this point. I'm not able to discount the things that I don't like. It's just not my character. It's not who I am. I got to consider all the evidence. I can't just consider the stuff I'm comfortable with. And, to be honest with you, at this point, what's consistent through this over a long period of time when you start talking to a lot of people is that there happens to be a big pool of the evidence that is not accounted for by classical science. I guess you could say that really falls more into that paranormal realm. Strange stuff, really, like the mind speak, like the cloaking, a lot of the different stuff. And there's just a lot of it when it comes to this topic in general, and it seems to be consistent a lot through it with a lot of the witnesses, and a lot of them encounter it. Some of them don't, some of them do. It's just like it's like people smelling the rotten Sasquatch smell. I never smelt it, but some people do. So I'm changing as the time is going by, and I'm starting to doubt the technology, and I'm starting to doubt my own efforts, and I'm starting to realize that I'm not really the person that's in control with this whole thing. It's starting to be more apparent that I'm more of a puppet on the string throughout this process rather than being the one that's controlling the scenario and the situation. It's like I just happen to be there. I'm not really the one that's controlling it. So, and these things aren't clearly just an organic being either. There's obviously, I'm starting to realize, I'm doubting, I don't want to acknowledge it, but it's starting to be there in my mind where there's something otherworldly going on with this whole topic and this phenomena. And it's just all related to my own experience at that point. And I'm still kind of considering some of it and not all of it. And I'm just starting to visit the possibility that there's something more going on, because I'm starting to get to the point where I'm putting in such my effort. I'm starting to get to the point where I just can't say that I'm failing, because I'm really not failing. I am getting information. I'm getting encounters. It just is happening to turn out to be something that I wasn't prepared for it to more or less be. But I'm not there yet at this point. It just happens to be I'm repeated experiences where things aren't making sense, and down mountain like the string under the rock and no pictures, and it's like, it's getting to the point where with me, I'm starting to learn that these things are all over the place. It's not that there's just a few of them. They're not rare. In fact, that's the furthest thing from the truth is rarity. And that was confirmed through the DNA later more for me, just common sense. But my own experience, and when you're starting to consider all these sightings in different areas, like Mason County is a good spot because Mason County is relatively a small area. It's like 900 square miles. And it has a lot of coastline, a lot of water in it. Yet there's a lot of sightings. And these sightings are relatively close together. They're not too far apart. But it can't be the same Bigfoots that are all around the whole county just showing up. It can't be the same group of 5 or 6, right? You're looking at multiple groups that are all within the same area. They're living close by to each other. And that further goes to lend to the idea that with all the technology and all the resources that are out there and all the people that are specifically looking, and then all the people that are out there that are just regular hunters that got game cameras all over the place or out in the woods all the time, there's sightings, but there's just a real lack of physical evidence, like photographic evidence and stuff like that, There's just not a lot of footprints or other stuff either, but people do see them. But how can they hide in North America at this point? I'm starting to realize there's something else going on. And so as this thing evolves, I end up going back to another research location that was kind of like the first one when the Olympic project started. Actually, the site happened and started before we formed the Olympic project, but then it continued on for a while. And it was Hartstein Island, and early on when I first started talking to Derek, he got me access to flats, and I started looking through flats, and Hartstein Island was a place that I was just drawn to right away because it's so close to where I lived. Within a couple miles of my house, I patrolled in there. It's in the county I work in. It's an island in Puget Sound, and it's just got a ton of sightings. All kinds of them by different people over a long period of time. And I asked Derek, how come you don't spend much time here? And he's like, we've been out there before. You didn't find anything. But I said, well, there's so many sightings, and it's a small island, It's not very big. It's like 20 miles long and like 4 miles across. And there's probably a couple thousand people that live on it. It's checkerboarded. It's timberland and then residential mixed together. And there's shellfish all the way around it. And there's a island at the south end of it owned by a tribe, Squaxin Island, that's adjacent to it. And you can almost cross between the two at a low tide with wading across. And, we got a fresh report through the BFRO after I asked him that. And so he started going out there and talking to these people that were renting a house on North Island Drive. And they started out hearing just vocalizations and stuff, like when ambulances and fire trucks would go by, the sirens would go. And then after they would go, something was mimicking the sirens in the woods around their house. And like everybody else, it seems to have these habituation situations, because that's what kind of this was building into at Hartstein, North Island Drive. These people moved into this house, were renters. They had 2 adult daughters that lived with them. Kind of weird. In their 20s. And then the daughters, they were from Montana. And I don't know if they came from like some sort of religious sect or something. The woman wrote a book, actually, about this experience at Hartstein. I can't remember what her name is. Toby Johnson knows about the book and the woman. And I never really talked to her. The adult daughters would sing on the back porch all the time. They would just sing outside, and apparently that was attracting them, and the Bigfoot started coming around, and the interaction was continuing, and they had a couple of sightings, and we found a track lying in the snow there of like 30 tracks up above the house. Derek found them. We recovered some hair adjacent to a sighting that the family had on the back of a tree that Derek sent off to Henner Fehrenbach, which he identified it as presumptive as Bigfoot. He's a hair analysis guy. I don't know if you've ever heard of him before. He's pretty famous. Old now. I don't know if he's still involved in anything, but he was the world-renowned guy for a long time. Test hairs all around the world, anything related to Bigfoot, but he was just a big hair expert in general, a scientist that did nothing but hair follicles. Anyway, so we ended up, our benefactor ended up leasing that house after the people that were living there moved. And we put a woman in that house. Her name was Beth. She was a Bigfoot researcher through the BFRO. And we put her in that house, and then our benefactor bought a massive amount of surveillance equipment and cameras and stuff, and just put it all on this place. Everything stopped immediately. No more Bigfoot stuff. She never had any luck whatsoever. 6 months went by. They decided not to renew the lease and abandon the site, and other people moved in. Well, after everybody left, I decided I wasn't really involved in that research site. I was busy doing stuff up in the Hamma and other places, and after they left, though, then I decided, well, I'm going back in there, because everybody's gone now, and I can just stop. It's right by my house. I can stop in here at work. So I put like 5 cameras out there. I think it was the following spring after they left. I started going back in there, and about 2-3 times a week, I would just pull in there and walk around in uniform sometimes, check cameras. And it was kind of different than what I was doing in every other location. I kind of did it at Dow Mountain because I was just trying to establish trading, and that was the only place I was doing gifting and stuff. Every other place I was non-invasive. I would try to not look like I was looking for Bigfoot. I would go in once or twice a year, set cameras, check them every 6 months, 10 months, 12 months, and that was it. I didn't want them to know I was in there looking for them. But Hartstein and Dow were different. I was down there trying to establish contact. And Hartstein, I would go walk around a couple times a week, sometimes more, and spend half an hour in there, 20 minutes, just wandering around. I'd set toys up on stumps. Nothing happened. And then all of a sudden, I had ran for sheriff that year because I was a whistleblower and I had lost the election. And it happened to be November 11th was the first day legally that you're ordered to pull campaign signs, or else you could get fined if your signs are out. So I started driving around that day and pulling signs. And I was all over the county, and I happened to be on Hartstein Island, and I happened to have my keys to my cameras with me. And the one thing that was different that day, well, 2 things in particular. Number one is I didn't plan on going and checking any cameras. I just randomly happened to be in the area of them and thought I would stop and check a couple of cameras out of convenience since I was there. And I didn't have a gun with me because I always carried a gun when I was in the woods around Mason County, especially because I was a cop there, and you never know who you're going to run to. It's a high crime area, and there's a lot of bad people around. And just for safety in general. But that particular time, I didn't have a gun with me. In fact, I wasn't even dressed to be in the woods. I had tennis shoes on and jeans and stuff. But this spot on Hartstein is right next to the road. It's like not, it's between houses. It's in a residential area, more or less, where there's like green belts and timber. And it's right along the main North Island Drive. You can actually hear and see cars driving by while I'm in the woods checking cameras. So I shouldn't be afraid. But I just pulled in there on a whim and said I'm going to check a couple cameras. And immediately when I pulled into the spot that I normally park at, which is a school bus stop, I started getting a feeling like I shouldn't be there and I should probably just go home. And I was like, why am I feeling like... It was like totally a feeling that just came out of nowhere, like projected into me, kind of. And that's what it felt like. It's like being projected onto you. Like, where did this come from? I'm like, I never thought like I shouldn't be here before. You know, this is like right next... I come here all the time. This is right where people live. Why should I feel like it's dangerous and I shouldn't be here? It's like I just had this feeling right away. Just go home. Don't even stop. Just go home. Don't get out of the car. Go home. And I ignored it. I went to the first camera, and as I'm going, it's like this voice is in my head saying, go home, go home. Don't be here. You don't want to be here. Dangerous here. Like there's just some unknown, unseen danger, like a black hole, like time has stood still. It was the weirdest thing. It's the weirdest feeling. I don't have anything to compare it to now, and I didn't have anything before. It was like a new thing that happened then, and it's never happened since. I've never felt that way ever since then. It's a weird, surreal, out-of-body, projected something, like something's projecting something into you. And when I pulled in, it was November. It had been really cold that fall. All the leaves were already off, and there's a creek on the property, but the water was really low, barely moving because it was so cold that it was dry. The cold sucks the moisture out of everything. And so there was no background noise from the creek at all. It was dead quiet other than like real faint raindrops coming down and hitting the leaf litter on the ground. And so I went to the first camera, which was about to the west from where I parked. And you go through the trees, and that one's actually the furthest away of the 2 that I was going to check. And right when I get to it, right next to the camera, I see like a 16-inch impression next to the camera to the side. And we had found 16.5-inch tracks in this area before. Those are the tracks we had found. And this is the first evidence I had seen that was for sure since I had been back in here for a few months. And I was pretty excited. So that excitement from seeing that started to overshadow this other nagging fear, dread, whatever it was that was in the back of my mind telling me that you shouldn't be here. You should go home. And so I got excited when I saw the track, and I want to check this camera, and I want to get to the next camera. And there was a couple pictures on the camera. I checked these cameras way more regularly, weekly or every couple weeks, because I was here all the time in this spot versus the stuff that I was checking once or twice a year. So I see this print next to it, and it wasn't like toes or anything. It was just the moss and everything was flattened down in the shape of a foot. You know, a flat, big impression, like 16-inch, right next to the camera. And so I'm excited. I grab it, reset the camera, and then I start moving to the next one. And as I'm going, I'm still having this feeling of dread and of unseen danger, like there's some predator out there or something. I don't know. It's the weirdest thing, and I can't explain it. So I get to the other camera, and I got like 25 keys to go through. And the other one I must have got through the keys quick because I don't recall it. The issue of the key doesn't stick in my mind. But in this one it does, because I had to go through this long ring of keys. And as I'm standing there in front of this camera, I have this dread and this feeling building on me, just super heavy. Like there's no time. Like you're in a black hole. It's like nothing exists. There's no life. It's like when the never-ending story and the nothing. That's what it is. It's like the nothing is out there on the edge of me, and it's something like that. It's this feeling I've never felt before or after. It's crazy, odd, and weird, and it's kind of evil feeling, I guess you could say, if you could say it was, because whatever it is was scary. I was real scared, but I had no reason to be scared. I was fighting the fear because the context of it made no sense to me whatsoever. I could hear cars driving by and see cars, but I'm deathly afraid, like, excuse my language, like a boogeyman is gonna get me. I don't know though, because I don't know what it is. But I get to this camera and I start going through these keys, and then I start hearing the sound of wish I could do it, but twigs breaking like this. And I can't, am I sure it's not raindrop? But it was distinct, like a twig breaking, and it sounds closer than as far as I can see, because I can see like 60 yards where there's this open area where there's these alder trees and these salmonberries in between, but the leaves are all down. Small alders mostly, a couple of big ones. And then the creek's beyond it, and I can see all the way to the creek, and then beyond that, it's cedar forest, and the limbs come way down low towards the ground. And what happened, I couldn't see in there, but that's where kind of the direction it was coming from. But the strange thing is that it sounded like it was closer than that. It was closer than that, but that's as far as I could see where I couldn't see. And it had to be there because that's the direction it was coming from. And just occasional twig would break. And I wasn't sure, like I said, was it a raindrop or a twig? I was afraid already, so everything was intensified. But I really didn't have a reason to be fearful, because I never was before. So I go through these keys, and this is building and building in me, and then I hear, I don't know, like 2/3 through the ring of keys, I hear. So now I know there's really something out there. It's not just twigs breaking, but that sounds like a deer snort to me, at least close enough to a deer snort. So I get comfort in that, like, okay, this is a known thing to me, and I'm going to see a deer, so I don't have to be afraid, right? So I'm looking, and I don't see a deer, and I keep going through the keys because I'm getting like really nervous now, to where I want to get the hell out of there. I don't want to be there. I had already decided most of the way through these keys that I'm not going through this ring of keys again. There's no way that I'm going to go spend all this time here. I'm out of here. If this doesn't work out, I'm gone. I get to the second to last key, and it works. It opens the camera. So I'm relieved at that point. I'm like, I'm about to get out of here. I can check my camera, switch the cards, and go. And I get the card out,